The Ball Theory of Christianity, based upon the research of Glenn Young. Ball and Christianity, Part 2. When we left off in Part 1, it was begin to be shown how the Phoenicians were, in fact, the Canaanites. That group culture of people, very long-lived. And what Part 1 began to establish was to show how Baal, the god portrayed in the Old Testament as the great rival god of Yahweh, whose worship was considered by the prophets as an abomination, is in fact the model for the Christ story. And Christianity is a morphed version of the Baal legend, not a reformed version of Judaism, nor a new covenant with the God Yahweh. We pick up. So as the Phoenicians and their influence began to expand onto what appears to be a global basis, we began to see their influence in history itself. Here, they conquered the sea. They were the first ones. And if you look at how many empires that were built throughout history, when you conquered the seas, you basically controlled the chessboard. Here is a Phoenician gold coin showing their ships taken to sea. Quite remarkable what these people did. Now, the world was not as we thought. What we see from the actual historical findings in archaeological digs throughout the Mediterranean world is that we begin to find hard evidence, archaeological evidence, ruins, those kind of things, starting about 1200 BC. Now, the Canaanites, this is what's so interesting about this, were the urban elites of their time. And the Hebrews, one of many groups of pagans, or simply rural peoples, as the term was originally used. In fact, there were a group of Hebrews, if they even existed. That's the hard thing of trying to nail this whole thing down, where you have hard evidence, and then you have evidence that's more predicated upon belief, legend, folklore, etc. And it's taken for fact, which is sad because that's how so many of us actually learned our history. So let's compare it to today. We can think of the Canaanites of then much like modern-day Americans. They were supporters of trade and capitalism. Hey, listen, these folks knew about capitalism. They wrote the book. Well, maybe not. Maybe the Sumerians wrote the book, and maybe someone, but these guys mastered it. They were known because of their acceptance of extensive diversity of thought. That's very key. They were urbanists who took great pleasure in urban life. We can see the followers of Yahweh, if at this time they did in fact follow Yahweh, much like the traits of modern religions of today, far less engaged in modern life, intolerant of other beliefs, and seeing the modern social view as evil, punishable by God. Yikes. What it's really showing is this. It was the Phoenicians who were the roots of our cultures. While the Bible writers and later Christians tried to wipe out the importance of Yahweh's rival, the ancients knew of it well. It wasn't a mystery to them. Check this out. This is Dionysius of Cyziana of 3 AD, Roman historian. Upon the Tyrrhenian Sea, the people live who styled themselves the Phoenicians. These were the first great founders of the world, founders of cities and of mighty states, who showed a path through seas before unknown. So much is lacking, unfortunately, where this race of people, their influence about what they brought is amazing. All right. So let's continue on this. Roots of our culture. Therefore, the evidence is based upon real history that the Canaanites, and not the Hebrews, were at least 2,000 years of actual verifiable history before the Hebrews. This is now further supported by the recent Sumerian tablets agreeing. So you have multiple sources now that are verifying this history that has been, well, virtually ignored since the Dark Ages and wiped out or tried to. All right. They are the foundations upon which the Western culture was developed. This can clearly be seen in every area, including religion. Again, all this history was repressed by the early Christian church. It had to be. There was good reason for it to be suppressed, if not tried to be wiped out. So the foundations of our culture, what can truly be said is that the West is more based upon Baalist Christian tradition than a Jewish Christian tradition, which is really, that term, Judeo-Christian, is a late 19th century term. As we will see, what is one of the founding principles of Christianity was in fact a theme in complete conformity to Baalism and a complete anthemium to the Jews. Now, here's real interesting. When you talk about anthemia, what is that? Well, here it is as the noun, something or someone that one vehemently dislikes. Racial hatred was the anthemia to her. The synonyms: an abomination, outrage, abhorrence, a disgrace, an evil, a bane, a boogabear. How about that? All right, more. A formal curse by a pope or a council of the church. You know, I have taken it in the rear end by a lot of people who label me as a heretic, who label me as, a dispeller of truth. No. When I say that curse, the Godspell is a curse, you can see that in the faith, the Christian faith, they know about curses very well. And this is what happens to a person who is excommunicated or denouncing a doctrine, which would be people like me. People like myself are an abomination, an outrage, an abhorrence, a disgrace, an evil. You get it? But how often history has shown that the ones who merely just try to point out the truth are the ones that are most reviled the most. Yeah. We continue. Listen, we have almost no understanding of real history of religion. And the question you have to ask is, why do we know so little about this history? We in the West, after centuries of basically forced conformity and indoctrination into the Christian worldview, have almost no understanding of the origins of what is held sacred. The Christians tried to repress all knowledge that came before them. This is history, folks. I'm not merely picking on one particular group, one particular belief system. I'm merely stating history and tried to destroy any options for source of knowledge other than the Bible. Reference, Closing of the Western Mind, for more background on this process. Someone said in the first one, well, you're not giving us any references. Well, all right, Cupcake. Time for you to step up because I got the references. Let's go. What is old is new again. Isn't that true about so much about us? You know, you can bet that if it was a trend before, it will become a trend again. What we think was new and unique about the dominant religion of our region is in fact neither new nor unique. Archaeologists have found the ancient writings to show much older traditions and beliefs much different. Carl Jung was much to show this as well, and Joseph Campbell. We have almost no understanding, again, of what we call real history of religion. For centuries, it was forbidden to question the dogma of the church. To do so was to open oneself up to torture and death. It is estimated in the Christian faith alone, built upon the foundation is the blood of children, women, men, over 250 million and counting. Try to question fundamental Christian and Muslim beliefs is to open oneself up to ridicule and isolation, and still far too often to attacks, and as we have seen, unfortunately, murder. Our species has this thing murder down. Now, whether it was by a God teaching us or what, but we got it down. We are living in a time when the freedom of the Enlightenment is considered war with the church. If you have a different belief than the Bible, you have been classified as a combatant. You are at war with the church, thus you are at war with God. This is how they've branded us. When really, we're not that way at all. We come out of this religion. All we're trying to say is maybe the history that you think that you have is not the right one. Key facts to understand. Christianity is such a latecomer to religious history with less than 1,800 years of importance. Think about this. Now, they try to massage it and they try to rearrange it. It's still, folks, it's a new religion. And the thing about it is, they took many things from the past and changed it to say it was theirs alone. Judaism is also a latecomer with no more than 4,000 years of history, and even based on biblical stories, only 3,000 years of it being more than a cult of the family of Abraham, if who lived, has been maligned because this person was a Samaritan. You see, the box is getting shorter and shorter. Much of its history, there was little to distinguish the practice of worship of Yahweh from that of Baal. Reference, the Yahweh Wars and Tribal Confederation, Rudolph Smin. Yes, the concept of what most people think in the Bible is this thriving community, right? Sophisticated. It wasn't that way at all, folks. What we know as modern Judaism is less than 400 years older than Christianity. Here's the clue, folks. There is no such thing as the Hebraic original faith. That was all shattered in 333 BC. Now, here's going to really where history starts coming in. This is Yahweh of Samaria and his Ashtaroth. Yahweh, Elohim, God. This is his wife. It was well known. Well known. Yahweh of Samaria. Kundatit, Ajrud, Sinai, Conversation, I'm not even getting into that. The first half of the 8th century BC, what you just saw was a drawing of Yahweh of Samaria and his Ashtaroth on a pottery shard. The inscription in Hebrew reads, "Thus says, ... say to Yahweh El, Yo Hasa, and I bless you, herewith, or have blessed you, to/before Yahweh of Samaria and his Ashtaroth. Note the portion of the bridled horse to the left of the figures. That is Baal, El, and Yahweh and his Ashtaroth. You getting it? Not making this up, not attacking anything. The greatest sin is ignorance. That is the cardinal sin, is ignorance. And if you choose to stay into ignorance, then you choose to stay into sin. Take a look. Here is one of the archaeological finds. This is Ashtaroth. This is Yahweh's wife. Yes. The New Testament, they didn't need Mary. God already had a wife. The Greek and Roman religions are not much older than the Hebrew religions, but was more widespread earlier. Even the Greeks and the Romans admitted that their religion was based upon the gods of the Phoenicians and the Egyptians. In Greek tradition, the very name Europe comes from the Phoenician princess Europa. Even the gods of the Middle East and Egypt, which are twice as old as the Greeks and the Romans, are only some 6,000 or 7,000 years old and are built upon a far more ancient stories. Therefore, what we have found in all of the Jewish and Christian sacred writings are just copies of older stories. Most of the stories came from the ancient religions of the Near East, Egypt, and Canaan, and older, with names and times changed, but little else. Discovered in 2006 in the Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, near the Syrian border, this has changed everything, is being called the oldest temple in the world, dating back roughly 9,800 BCE, or some 12,000 years ago, some 4,000 to 5,000 years older than any previous found temples. Reference, Magician of the Gods, Graham Hancock. The findings is forcing a reconsideration on the theories on the development of civilization itself. One of the finds show what could be the oldest known crucifix with a cross and a lion on it. The lion was the sign of the astrological age of the time there in Göbekli Tepe, the age of Leo. And there it is. This is history. Now, you can either accept it or reject it. The examples are so many, but just for a few. The flood story is found in the Gilgamesh, 3,000 years before it was written in the Bible. Explain that. You can throw out the book of Genesis. It was never written by any Hebrew, at least the first part of it. The first great king, Sargon, was placed in a boat as an infant and found in the reeds and raised by a princess 1,000 years before the story of Moshe. Hammurabi received the laws directly from God 700 years before Moses. Hercules was the son of God who died and rose to heaven to sit at the right hand of his father's throne, along with many other gods and heroes. Now, this is Hammurabi, receiving the laws from God. They were in great detail, as was the actual amount of the law given to Moshe by God according to Jewish tradition and the Old Testament. Not just 10 commandments, but a whole code of worship and living. I don't know how you reconcile some of this. The early Christians were ridiculed by the Greeks and the Romans and the Jews because of the sources on the similarities of their story to so many other religions. The Gnostics were the first Christians, Hellenist beliefs. Now, if you don't know what Hellenists are, you need to understand this, because it's the Hellenization of the culture of the Middle East to the Mediterranean that has dictated the Christian beliefs, the Muslim beliefs, and many of the beliefs today. They had to acknowledge how similar their teachings about their Jesus. Now, it was never called Jesus. We don't know what the name they used. It's just a fact. Jesus is a made-up name. Were to so many other God stories, their explanation, are you ready for this? And this is what the Vatican came out with. All previous religions, and by the way, it was in 525, were the trick of the devil, hoping to confuse people when the real Christ came. This is still the official line of the Christian church. The real historical truth is this: for millennia, religions have not changed. They have morphed. New groups modifying old stories give new names and places to traditional events, and many proclaim the beginning of the new era, which is nothing more than a renaming of old gods and kings and traditions. And thus is where we get the term year one of the new era, and that has been said so many times. Notice the fish and the cross, not a Christian symbol. This was actually at Carthage. And it represents the Queen of Heaven, Tanit, based upon the Egyptian symbols and so on back in time. The fish is not a new one for the symbol of Christianity. Neither is the cross. It goes back, way back. All groups proclaiming a new contract with God or a new God or gods bring a new good news are wrong. Their stories have all been retellings of very ancient tales. There was little new about the good news. And as we will see, the same is true of the story of the Christ. Now, this is the retolding story. This is Gilgamesh killing the bull of heaven from the stories popular in the Sumerian cultures dating back 6,000 BC. This is Theseus killing the monitor, popular in the Greek world from about 35,000 years ago till it was repressed by the Vatican. Excuse me. This is Mithras killing the sacred bull from Persian world about 1,700 years before one of the chief rivals of Christianity. As you can see, again, even in the beginnings of when Christianity was being formed, it was many other competing beliefs were competing for the top position. In fact, of the three major influences on early Christianity were not the Jewish religion at all. They were the Persian dualism, the Greek mystery cults, and Baalism. And you will see the addendum for the background on the Persian and classical concepts. You have to be, listen, what I'm trying to tell you is before you start judging this, is that it's some kind of the thing of the devil, you know, we can't listen to this. This is just evil. Maybe expand your mind a little bit and understand Persian and classical concepts that in fact impressed upon our concepts today. Again, we move forward. We need to remember the Christians' focus on the absolute truth of the Bible has created in our culture a false set of historical facts. Often these facts are only stated in the Bible and supported by no other historical means. I have put the challenge out to anybody. Show me any written evidence coming from 35 AD Jerusalem, Rome, Syria, Canaan, India, Egypt, that validate that this story happened. It didn't happen. Therefore, most of what we think we know about history is false. And much of what we think we know about religious history is even worse. It's completely unsupported. To begin with, how old is religion? We find evidence in a belief in the afterlife from grave sites some 50,000 years ago. We see worship of the spirit of all living things from around that time, thanking a deer for letting itself be killed. And to the amazement of most historians, we can now see with the findings of Gobekli Tepe that there was a well-organized religious facility in place and functioning, with extensive use of images from the natural world at least 12,000 years ago. This was before the flood, or whatever time they would try to tell you. We know that what appears to be the first organized religion based on the concept of a higher God comes at least 20,000 years ago, and some argue much older. But here's the thing, folks. It's not the God of today. She's female. I have been telling you all along, this matriarchal point of view of religion today is perverted. How can the same thing be above as it is below? Show me a man who can give birth to a baby. God or no God. And there she is. This is Mother Goddess. It's older than your Bible, older than your Quran, older than your Vedic. Mother Goddess from the oldest cities around 10,000 years ago. She was worshipped from very early. There was no male God. There was female. It's how life starts. We'll pick up later.